I just found out my husband had an affair 6 years ago, just 2 months after I gave birth. He got his affair partner pregnant. Now I want to leave him. I used to believe love could fix anything, that if you just tried hard enough, forgave deep enough, and waited long enough, the person you loved would eventually become who you needed them to be. That belief was my anchor, when everything else felt like it was sinking. I was 21 when I met him. He was tall, charming, with this lazy grin that made me feel like I was the only person in the world when he looked at me. We met at a friend's party, some cheap beer and loud music kind of night, and I still remember the way he leaned against the kitchen counter like he owned the place. Our eyes met across the room, and just like that, my world started spinning around him. It didn't take long before I fell hard. He had this way of talking that made everything seem like an adventure. He made me feel alive, like there was something waiting for us just around the corner, something better, something beautiful. And when I told him I was falling for him, he smiled and said, "Good, because I've already hit the ground for you." Looking back now, I don't know if that was real, or if he just knew what to say. The red flags didn't come all at once. They were slow, almost like whispers in the background that I was too in love to hear clearly. It started with the way he never wanted to talk about his past, especially his ex. Anytime I brought her up, even casually, he would stiffen and say, "Why does that matter now? She's not part of my life." Except she was. She was the mother of his first child, and though their relationship had supposedly ended long before me, I always sensed something off in the way he spoke about her, like there was unfinished business. But I told myself I was being paranoid. I had no reason not to trust him. The first real blow came less than 2 years into dating. I found out I was pregnant. It wasn't planned. We were still figuring out life together, and suddenly there was this tiny heartbeat inside me changing everything. I was terrified. I didn't have a stable job. I had just barely finished college, and now I was going to be a mom. He took the news surprisingly well though, almost too well. He hugged me and said, "We'll make this work. I promise." He proposed to me a few weeks later. No grand gesture, no flowers or candles, just us in our tiny apartment, sitting on the floor with takeout containers and baby name lists. He took my hand and said, "Let's just do this. Let's be a family." And I said yes, because in that moment, I wanted so badly to believe we were meant to be. But things didn't magically get better after the ring. If anything, they started to unravel more quickly. I caught him sexting with another woman when I was 5 months pregnant. It was late at night, and he had left his phone on the nightstand. I wasn't snooping, I swear I wasn't. A message popped up with a preview I couldn't ignore. My heart dropped. I picked it up, hoping it was something innocent, some joke from a friend, but no, it was graphic. It was cruel, and it wasn't the first message. I shook him awake and asked him what the hell this was. He rubbed his eyes and looked at me like I was the problem. "You're overreacting. It's just words." I didn't do anything. I cried in the bathroom that night, hand on my belly, wondering how I'd gotten myself into this mess. I told myself it was a mistake, that maybe he was just scared about becoming a dad again, that he didn't mean it. God, I was so desperate to believe him. After our daughter was born, I convinced myself things were finally turning around. He was attentive, sweet. He stayed up with her at night when I was too exhausted to move. He made me laugh again, and just when I started to feel safe in our little bubble, everything shattered. It was a message, this time on social media, from someone I didn't even know. The guy claimed to be the ex-boyfriend of his ex, the mother of his first child. He told me that they had been seeing each other again behind my back, that she was pregnant, and that the baby was my husband's. I remember staring at the screen, frozen. The message was short, straightforward, but it hit me like a freight train. I confronted him immediately. My voice shook, and I was already crying before I even said a word. He didn't even blink. "She's lying," he said. "She's crazy. You know how she is. You're really gonna believe her ex over your own husband." He said it with such conviction. I almost did. I wanted to. I wanted so badly for it to not be true, but something in me cracked that night. Some part of me stopped believing him fully, even if I didn't admit it out loud. Still, I stayed, because our daughter was barely a year old, because I didn't have a job, because I didn't have a backup plan, because I was scared. I buried the doubt deeper than it deserved to be, and tried to hold on to what we had. We even got married while she was pregnant. Can you imagine? I said my vows while another woman carried his child, and I didn't even know. The guilt eats at me still. I asked him about it for years. For years, every time I couldn't sleep, every time I saw something suspicious, every time my gut screamed at me that something was wrong, I would ask him again, and every time he would look me in the eye and say, "I swear to God, I didn't cheat on you." He was so good at lying, and I was so good at hoping. Life moved on, as if everything was fine. We settled into a routine, and on the surface, we looked like the average family. My daughter grew up happy, oblivious to the dark undercurrents beneath our smiles and family photos. Friends and family praised how perfect our life appeared. But inside, a quiet storm brewed, one that I was constantly struggling to keep hidden from everyone, including myself. I remember moments where I would watch him with our daughter, playing outside in the backyard or gently reading bedtime stories, and I'd wonder how someone so warm and gentle in those moments could harbor such secrets. But then I'd remind myself how well he'd lied before. It became a tug-of-war between trusting my heart and listening to my gut, and for years I forced myself to ignore the whispers inside my mind. Soon after, I became pregnant again. It wasn't planned, but life never seemed to follow our plans anyway. Our second child brought a new wave of hope into our home. I told myself maybe this baby would help us heal, that maybe becoming parents again would finally force him to grow up and become the man I desperately wanted him to be. But life isn't a fairy tale. Reality doesn't bend to hopeful wishes or silent prayers. Instead, our problems just festered beneath the surface, waiting for the perfect moment to erupt. That eruption came when the truth I'd tried so hard to bury resurfaced, loudly and painfully. One ordinary evening, cleaning up after dinner, I stumbled across some old messages on his phone, messages he thought he'd deleted. My heart sank as I read his words, words that confirmed everything I had feared. When he realized I'd seen them, he froze. The color drained from his face, and he knew he'd been caught. This time, there was no charming smile, no easy explanations. "It's not what you think," he stammered, the panic clear in his voice. "Don't lie to me again," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "Please, I've had enough of the lies." We stood there, in our kitchen, the weight of years of deceit hanging heavily between us. Finally, he spoke, barely louder than a whisper. "She assaulted me," he said, avoiding my eyes. "She forced herself on me. I was ashamed, okay. I didn't know what to do, so I kept quiet." I stared at him, stunned. My mind raced. The idea that he'd been victimized hadn't even crossed my mind, and for a moment, guilt replaced anger. I reached out, instinctively wanting to comfort him, despite the screaming voice inside me that said something still wasn't right. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked, searching his face for the truth. "Because I was ashamed, and scared you'd leave me," he replied, finally meeting my eyes. He looked so sincere, so broken, that I desperately wanted to believe him. In the days that followed, he even went as far as contacting attorneys, swearing he would press charges. I watched him make phone calls, tell his story, play the role of a victim, and yet something felt hollow. The attorneys explained that it would be challenging and painful, that his story would be questioned relentlessly in court. He told me he needed time to think about it. But deep down, I knew he'd never follow through. Still, I stayed, not because I fully believed him, but because the alternative, the possibility that he had willingly betrayed me, felt like too much to bear. And maybe, in some twisted way, the lie was easier to accept than the harsh truth. I'd just given birth to our second child, and the thought of being alone, a single mother of 2 young children, was overwhelming. I felt trapped, like I'd backed myself into a corner with no escape. We continued on, as if everything was normal, but the tension was always there, bubbling just beneath the surface. Trust, once broken, leaves scars, and our scars were impossible to ignore. Conversations turned superficial, affection became robotic. Our bed felt colder each night. The intimacy we'd once shared had disappeared, replaced with awkward silences and a heavy emptiness neither of us dared to discuss openly. Over time, the warmth in my heart cooled. I went through the motions of life, parenting our children, managing the household, but always feeling disconnected from him. Even the smallest doubts magnified into moments of quiet panic. I stopped questioning him outright, but my heart continued to scream in silent frustration. Years passed in this strange, numb routine, until finally, this year, something inside me snapped. The doubts, the fears, they refused to stay buried any longer. One night, after another evening of cold silence and distant looks, I confronted him again. But this time was different. "I need the truth," I said calmly, my voice steady but firm. "I'm tired. I can't live this lie anymore." He looked away, his jaw tightening, his fists clenched. "I already told you everything," he muttered, but his voice trembled. I took a breath, knowing deep in my bones he was still hiding something. "Tell me," I whispered. "For once just respect me enough to tell me the truth." He sat down, defeated, shoulders sagging. After a long silence, he finally said the words I'd feared most. "It wasn't just one time," he confessed softly. "We had an affair, on and off. It lasted for almost a year." His words punched the air from my lungs. My knees felt weak, and I sank onto the couch, reeling. My whole body shook, anger mixing violently with grief. He had lied, again and again, for so many years. He had looked me straight in the eye, countless times, swearing on our children, swearing on our love, that he'd never betrayed me, and each time, he knew he was lying. "Why?" I asked through my tears. "Why did you keep lying to me for so long?" He hung his head in shame. "Because I didn't want to lose you," I laughed bitterly. It was the cruelest irony. "You didn't want to lose me," I repeated, my voice trembling with rage. "But you didn't care enough not to cheat in the first place." He was silent. There was nothing left to say. In that moment, everything we'd built felt like a lie. All the years I'd sacrificed, all the pain I'd endured, it all suddenly felt meaningless. The realization was sharp and clear. I no longer loved the man sitting before me. It was over. It's strange how clarity arrives when you least expect it, like a sudden rainstorm washing away years of dirt and leaving everything raw and exposed. Sitting in our living room, the truth he'd hidden so deeply now laid bare before us. I felt lighter somehow, despite the crushing sadness and burning anger. For the first time in years, I could finally see the path forward. That night, I didn't sleep. My mind raced, replaying every moment I'd overlooked, every late night he'd spent away, every hushed phone call, every glance he'd exchanged with her that I'd brushed off. It all made sense now, and while the pain of his betrayal stung deeply, it was my own blindness that hurt the most. In the morning, as the pale sunlight filtered through the blinds, I knew what I had to do. "I want a divorce," I said calmly, over coffee, my voice steady despite my shaking hands. He looked up, startled, the coffee cup frozen halfway to his lips. "What? You heard me," I repeated, staring into his eyes with resolve. "I want a divorce." He set the cup down bewildered, as if he truly hadn't expected me to leave after everything he'd done. "You're just going to throw away 9 years. Our family? You threw it away a long time ago," I whispered, tears filling my eyes. "I'm just accepting it." He began to panic, pleading with me to reconsider, promising that he'd changed, swearing he wasn't the same selfish person anymore. But the truth he'd finally revealed couldn't be undone by empty promises or pleas for forgiveness. Every time he spoke, I saw years of lies reflected in his eyes. "You don't love me anymore," he asked quietly, defeat creeping into his voice. I paused, feeling a strange calmness as I answered truthfully, for the first time in years. "No, not like I used to. And I don't think you really love me either." He looked away, silent. Perhaps even he realized how hollow his protests had become. In the weeks that followed, reality set in sharply. Divorce isn't as simple as walking away. We'd bought our dream house only a year before, a place that was supposed to be a fresh start for us. Now it felt like a cruel joke. The house we had filled with dreams and hopes suddenly felt empty, haunted by promises that had never been real. Financially, I felt cornered again. I'd spent years taking care of our children, putting my own career on hold, assuming we'd be together forever. I hadn't prepared myself for the possibility of starting over alone. And now, here I was, facing the very thing I'd feared most, being a single mother, no financial independence, no clear way forward. Each night, I lay awake thinking of my children. They adored their father, oblivious to the lies that defined him. My heart ached at the thought of breaking their little worlds apart. I worried how they'd cope, how they'd understand why Mummy and Daddy no longer lived together. The guilt threatened to suffocate me. One evening, while cooking dinner, my daughter walked into the kitchen and hugged my leg. "Mommy, are you sad?" I knelt down, holding back tears, and brushed her hair from her face. "Mommy's just thinking." She looked at me, innocent eyes wide with trust. "Thinking about what?" "About making things better," I whispered, kissing her forehead. "For you and your brother." I knew then that despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, leaving was the right thing to do, not just for me, but for them. Staying in a broken marriage, modeling unhappiness, dishonesty, and resentment would teach my children lessons far more damaging than the pain of separation ever could. Days later, I reached out to friends and family, finally sharing the truth I'd hidden for so long. To my surprise, they were overwhelmingly supportive, embracing me with warmth and understanding, encouraging me to reclaim the life I'd lost. My best friend Sarah held my hand and said, "You're stronger than you know, you're going to get through this." And slowly, I started to believe her. I found a job, not glamorous but enough to start building independence. Each small step felt empowering. I created a separate bank account, made budgets, and researched apartments within our school district. For the first time in years, I felt control returning to my life. Yet, at home, tension thickened. My husband swung between denial and anger. One moment, he begged me to reconsider, promising he'd changed, and the next he'd bitterly accuse me of destroying our family, placing blame everywhere but on himself. One evening, after yet another bitter argument, I stood firm in front of him, my voice unwavering. "I didn't ruin this marriage. You did. I'm tired of carrying your guilt. I deserve better. Our children deserve better." He stared at me, shocked at my confidence. It was as if he were seeing me clearly for the first time in years. "You're making a mistake," he warned quietly, still unwilling to fully acknowledge his role in this mess. "The only mistake I made was staying quiet for too long," I answered firmly. As days turned into weeks, I felt myself growing stronger. His presence no longer had the power it once had. The emotional chains I'd worn for years loosened, giving me space to breathe, to feel, to heal. And though our divorce was just beginning, full of uncertainty, challenges, and pain, I began to rediscover who I was beneath all the scars he'd left behind. It wasn't easy, but each step toward freedom made me feel more alive. The chains were finally breaking, and I knew I could never turn back. Stepping into a new life felt both terrifying and exhilarating. For years I'd existed as half of a broken partnership, bending my identity around someone else's mistakes. Now standing alone for the first time in nearly a decade, I was forced to ask myself a question I'd long avoided. Who was I without him? Moving out wasn't easy. Packing our life into cardboard boxes made everything painfully real. Each item held a memory: the coffee mug he'd used every morning, the family portraits we'd posed for when things still felt possible, the holiday decorations we'd hung together, pretending everything was okay. But with each box sealed, the burden felt lighter. I was no longer bound to the past. I was moving forward. On our first night in our new apartment, my children were restless. The unfamiliar surroundings made bedtime a challenge. My daughter asked softly, "When are we going home?" "This is our home now," I whispered, brushing her hair gently. "We'll make it special together. I promise." Despite her uncertainty, I noticed something unexpected in her eyes. Trust. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she trusted me to guide her through. That small look fueled my determination. In the days that followed, I poured myself into creating a space filled with warmth and safety. I hung fairy lights in the kids' rooms, decorated the walls with bright pictures, and filled shelves with their favorite books. Each gesture was a small promise that we would find happiness again. We would redefine what home meant. My husband and I communicated minimally, mostly through text, our messages limited to logistical matters about the kids. It was easier that way, as seeing him only reopened wounds still too raw. Occasionally he'd try to slip in an apology, but the apologies felt empty, hollow echoes from a past I was desperate to move beyond. One afternoon, while unpacking the last of our things, I came across our wedding album. My fingers lingered over the glossy pages filled with smiling faces and bright eyes, blissfully ignorant of the heartbreak ahead. Tears blurred my vision as I flipped through the images. It was painful, not because I missed him, but because I mourned the naive girl I'd once been. I closed the album gently, deciding to store it away, perhaps to revisit when the pain wasn't so fresh. It didn't belong in our new beginning. Over the next weeks, I dove into rebuilding my sense of self. Small things I'd once ignored became meaningful again. I started reading books I'd put off for years, cooked dishes I'd always wanted to try, and spent time outdoors with the kids. For the first time in ages, laughter filled our home, real laughter, unburdened by hidden resentments or false pretenses. I also reconnected with friends I'd unintentionally pushed away during my marriage. Each conversation, each warm embrace, reminded me that my world was far larger than I'd allowed myself to believe. Sarah became my rock, encouraging me every step of the way. "You look lighter," she said one afternoon over coffee. "It's like you're finally yourself again." I smiled, tears of relief forming at the corners of my eyes. I think I'm starting to remember who that is. Yet, there were still hard moments. Late at night, when the kids were asleep and silence filled the apartment, doubts crept in. Could I really handle everything alone? Had I failed my children by breaking their family apart? During those times, I reminded myself why I'd chosen this path. It wasn't just about me, it was about teaching my children the importance of honesty, respect, and strength. I refused to let them grow up watching their mother tolerate betrayal. I wanted them to know that love shouldn't hurt or humiliate. It should empower and uplift. As weeks turned to months, our small apartment began to feel genuinely like home. Financially, things remained tight, but I discovered resourcefulness I hadn't realized I possessed. My job became more than just a paycheck. It became a source of pride. Earning my own money was empowering, proof that I could rebuild my life independently. Eventually, my husband seemed to accept the new reality, or at least stopped fighting it openly. He became more cooperative, more civil in our interactions, as if he too finally understood that things had permanently changed. Despite everything, I hoped he would eventually grow, if not for me, then for the sake of our children. They deserved a father who could at least learn from his mistakes. One evening, while tucking my daughter into bed, she surprised me by asking, "Mommy, are you happy now?" I paused, carefully considering her question. "Yes, baby, I think I am. Are you?" She nodded sleepily. "I miss Daddy, but I like it here. You're happier, and that makes me happy." Her honesty broke my heart open, but in a good way. It validated the path I'd chosen, the difficult but necessary decisions I'd made. I kissed her goodnight, my heart swelling with gratitude for her courage and resilience. Life wasn't perfect yet, but each day felt brighter. I slowly shed the insecurities that had defined my past. When I looked in the mirror, I no longer saw a woman burdened by regret or shame. Instead, I saw strength, determination, and most importantly, hope. I knew I wasn't finished healing, not by a long shot, but every morning when I woke up, I felt stronger, clearer, and more alive than I'd ever felt during the years I'd spent silently suffering. One weekend afternoon, sitting quietly by the window sipping coffee as sunlight warmed my skin, I smiled genuinely. It felt foreign but wonderful, a spontaneous joy I'd nearly forgotten existed. At that moment, I realized something profound. I was no longer defined by someone else's betrayal. I was becoming my own person again, someone capable of happiness, fulfillment, and unconditional self-love. And I knew without a doubt that I'd never go back to the shadows I'd left behind. The first anniversary of our separation arrived quietly, bringing reflection rather than regret. A year had passed since I'd found the courage to leave, and though the journey had been difficult, I'd grown into someone stronger than I'd ever imagined possible. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in gentle shades of purple and gold, I sat outside on our small balcony, listening to the distant laughter of my children playing inside. A cool breeze brushed my skin, and for a moment peace filled every inch of me. So much had changed. My children were thriving. Though there had been difficult moments, tearful conversations about why Mummy and Daddy no longer lived together, they had adjusted with remarkable resilience. My fears about them carrying lasting emotional wounds slowly faded, replaced by pride in how bravely they faced this new reality. They laughed freely again, a beautiful sound that filled our home with warmth and joy. My ex-husband and I had finally settled into a cordial, cooperative arrangement. Our interactions remained limited, but bitterness had given way to acceptance. He seemed genuinely remorseful now, finally understanding the gravity of his actions. While forgiveness wasn't easy, I'd reached a point of calm detachment. He would always be their father, but I no longer bore the weight of his mistakes. More importantly, I had finally learned to forgive myself for staying too long, for believing too deeply, for ignoring the signs. I'd come to accept that those years weren't wasted. but rather lessons guiding me to become the woman I was today. One evening, Sarah invited me over for dinner, a casual get-together with a few mutual friends. Initially, I'd hesitated. Social gatherings still felt slightly foreign, but with gentle encouragement from Sarah, I agreed. That evening was a revelation. I found myself laughing openly, enjoying conversations without the heavy cloud of self-doubt lingering above me. When Sarah pulled me aside later that night, she hugged me tightly and whispered, "It's so good to see you happy again." And she was right, I was happy. Not the cautious happiness I'd felt fleetingly over the years, but a deep, authentic joy that came from finally being at peace with myself. Over time, my career began to flourish. The job I'd initially taken out of necessity turned into a passion I hadn't expected. I discovered talents I'd overlooked, skills that made me feel valued and appreciated. My confidence blossomed, and soon, financial independence felt empowering instead of intimidating. Slowly, I began to open my heart again, not necessarily seeking love, but open to the idea that love didn't have to mean sacrifice or betrayal. I began to believe there was someone out there who would see my scars and love me not in spite of them, but because of the strength they represented. Yet I was careful, protective of the life I'd rebuilt. I vowed never again to lose myself in someone else, to ignore my instincts or dismiss my worth. One afternoon, as I picked up my children from school, my daughter handed me a drawing. It showed our family, smiling, happy. Above our heads, she'd carefully written the words, "Our happy family." I looked at her, eyes misting. "It's beautiful." She hugged my waist tightly, looking up earnestly. "See, Mommy, we're still a family. We're still happy." Her innocent wisdom touched my heart deeply, reaffirming everything I'd fought for. Family didn't have to look like the perfect image I'd once chased. Family was love, respect, and safety. And we had all of that right here, just the three of us. As months turned into another year, life continued to blossom. Our little apartment became our sanctuary, filled with laughter, joy, and unconditional love. The wounds from the past became faded memories, reminders of the strength it took to rebuild from scratch. One evening, after putting the children to bed, I sat down and opened the old wedding album I'd tucked away months ago. Flipping through the pages, I no longer felt sadness or bitterness. Instead, I felt compassion for the young woman I once was, the woman who had believed so earnestly, who tried so hard to hold things together. Quietly, I whispered to her, "You did your best. It's okay now." Closing the album, I felt a powerful sense of closure. I'd finally come full circle. Life had given me heartbreak, betrayal, and fear, but it had also given me the strength to walk away, to heal, and to find myself again. I'd learned that endings could become beautiful beginnings, even if it didn't seem possible at first. Now, sitting in my own home, surrounded by peace and love, I knew I'd found something priceless, myself. And with that knowledge, my future stretched before me, filled with endless possibilities. I smiled softly, feeling truly alive. The past had shaped me, but it no longer defined me, and I knew with absolute certainty that the best chapters of my story were yet to come.